Throughout history, there have been many torture methods used upon suffering people, which became execution methods, as people were subjected to terrifying treatment. For example, on the rack inside the Tower of London, there was a priest known as Nicholas Owen, who was strapped to the infamous stretching device and was then racked limb from limb, and a plate was then put on his stomach to press his hernia. But Owen was killed by the rack and his ordeal. Inside of cities, there were many gibbet cages seen suspended in the air, and it was common to see someone alive inside of these, and they were locked in the cage as part of their execution ordeal. Eventually, the condemned would die, and their remains would then be picked at by crows and other animals, who they would get a feast. Eventually, the bones of the deceased would fall from the cage onto the floor, ready for the next execution to go ahead inside of the gibbet cage. But there was one torture and punishment method used inside of Asia, which also was an execution method, and it led to the harrowing public death and demise of a victim. The Cangue was also known as the Gia, and was a simple device, but it was one that had a harrowing consequence. The Cangue was a device which locked the head of a victim inside of it. And coupled with this, the victim often found themselves shackled up or chained to objects so they could not move. Most cangues were rather heavy wooden boards which were placed around the neck of someone, and these were made from 2 pieces of wood joined together, meaning that some unfortunate soul could be locked in there and they could not escape. It may be similar to medieval-style torture methods or punishment methods such as the pillory, but it was much more deadly and was an execution ordeal in itself. The victim could obviously breathe inside of the cangue, but because of the size of the wooden board around their neck and the fact their arms and legs were shackled, then they could not feed themselves and they would starve or dehydrate rather quickly. Because of this, they knew their death was imminent and incoming, and those prisoners who had committed very serious crimes were sentenced to execution in this manner. It was similar to a form of gibbeting, as someone alive would be left to rot and die, and they would be given no food or water, and often guards stood by watching to ensure that none of the public helped them out. It was used for public humiliation, as people every day would pass by the victim in the cangue, and they would often jeer at them and mock them for their fate. But if someone did give a victim some food, it was only making the suffering worse, as the food would only prolong their life and also their ordeal. There were some who took pity on the victims and fed them, but if it was not used for execution, then the cangue would be used for a set period of time, allowing someone to be released when the time was right and the authorities felt they had been punished enough. The punishment and execution method was written inside of the Great Ming legal code of the 14th century, and it had been used for a long time, and was even used during the 20th century to punish offenders, but there were specific rules designed as to how someone could be punished using the cangue. It was said the board used should weigh up to 15 kilograms, and that more serious crimes should be punished using a heavier board to make the suffering of the person much worse. But using a heavy board would be painful and could lead to disfigurement, and the guards could also add extra weight to the board by making the ordeal worse. But there were other variations of the cangue used, in which the person could be executed using the wooden board. With this, the wooden board would be placed on the top of a cage, and the victim could not touch the ground with their feet. With this, the victim was then forced to stand without having pressure on their neck. But when the supports were removed, the device would then strangle them. The cangue was seen inside of cities and towns in different ways, as some religious people used it as a method of apologising for their sins in similar ways to the medieval period in England, where monks would whip themselves to apologise to God for their behaviour. But the cangue was a very straightforward torture and execution method, and what it did was cause the slow starvation to death of someone, and if someone was locked in the device, it must have been harrowing knowing that their death was soon coming on the horizon. There was no escape, and even by people taking pity on them, they were only prolonging the inevitable, and it's probable that the victim just wanted to succumb to their fate as quickly as they could. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe, and again, thank you so much for watching.